Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. I will now put on my sociologist of religion hat and talk about something related to the Roman Catholic Church, which is a fascinating church that has existed, I don't know, I guess since the days of the Church Fathers. There has long been a dispute among the three branches of Christian Orthodoxy, the main ones, Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and Oriental Orthodoxy, as to which one is true. And there are some other minor orthodoxies which are not included among those three. The main dispute that has existed among those orthodoxies has concerned the position of the Pope. The Pope is the Bishop of Rome, but somewhere along the line, the Bishop of Rome became the Pope, became the head of the church. And that is something, obviously, that neither Eastern Orthodox, nor Oriental Orthodox, nor any of the other branches of Christian Orthodoxy would agree with. And so that has been a major stumbling block to the reunification of those three branches of Orthodoxy. And there have been attempts to bring them together in recent years. There have been talks to bring them together, but so far, those talks have been unsuccessful. Uh, Pope Paul himself, I remember, was a leading advocate for that, and now Pope Francis is an advocate for that as well. And so let's talk about that in terms of the current Pope's general attitudes toward conservatism in his church. And I think that his generalized attitude toward conservatism, placing it in a somewhat negative light, may be a good sign, perhaps, for a coming together of those three Christian orthodoxies. Why? Well, if the Pope is willing to criticize conservative Roman Catholics for being conservative Roman Catholics, that might indicate his willingness to abandon his role as the Pope, maybe. Do I think that is likely? No, I don't think it's likely, but I think it certainly is a better prospect right now than it was, say, during the time of Pope Paul, who was the first Pope that I personally remember. So let me read to you an article written about this subject, and then we can talk about it afterwards. This article is taken from Reuters. It is titled, Conservatives Have Suicidal Attitude, and it was published today. And fascinating article, and I will read to you the entire thing. Pope Francis said his conservative critics within the Roman Catholic Church in the United States are trapped in a suicidal attitude, according to an interview with CBS. During the April 24th interview with 60 Minutes that will air this Sunday, Pope Francis was asked his thoughts on the conservative backlash against his papacy, with many of his critics being American clergy members. Pope Francis responded by saying a conservative is someone who clings to something and does not want to see beyond it. It is a suicidal attitude, the pontiff said, according to a brief transcript made available by CBS Thursday. Because one thing is to take tradition into account, to consider situations from the past, but quite another to be closed inside a dogmatic box. Pope Francis has clashed with the conservative wing almost since he was elected as head of the church in 2013. This doesn't seem like it was that long ago, does it? But it was. Moves conservatives have included papal attempts to make the church more welcoming to the LGBT community and give lay people more responsibility in the church. Francis last year dismissed a conservative U.S. bishop who was a withering critic of his papacy and said the conservative wing in the U.S. church was reactionary. He also stripped a conservative American cardinal of some Vatican privileges. So that is the article. It is a fascinating article. It is one that I did not expect to see at this point. In fact, it is one that I would not have expected to have ever seen from Pope Francis. Why? Well, because when Pope Francis was still a bishop serving in Brazil, he was an enemy of liberation theology. He was opposed to the idea of incorporating Marxism into Roman Catholicism, which essentially is what liberation theology is. And for that reason, Pope Francis, before he was Pope Francis, was generally seen as a Roman Catholic conservative. But now, either he has made a transformation, which I think is not likely, or he has revealed who he really is. In other words, he is not a liberation theologian, but he is not a conservative Roman Catholic either. Instead, he is a progressive Roman Catholic. And I think he has demonstrated that throughout his time in the papacy. The problem with Roman Catholic popes is that they get to basically call the shots for as long as they are in the Vatican. Once they are gone, once they are replaced, and a new pontiff takes over, that new pontiff basically has free reign. And that new pontiff can do whatever he wants, more or less. Can turn back the clock, can turn the clock forward, can keep things the same, whatever. The pontiff, the pope, is the one who has the power. Now, Pope Francis has that power, but he won't have it forever. And so there is no guarantee that the Roman Catholic Church, as we see it right now, will be the Roman Catholic Church, say, a decade from now. And I would guess a decade from now, Pope Francis will not be around anymore, and somebody else will have replaced him. Who knows who that will be? I would suspect that a lot of conservative Roman Catholics are working behind the scenes, trying to assure that the next pope is not like Pope Francis. I might be wrong. Certainly, I could be wrong. But I suspect that is something that they are trying to do. Whether they are successful is an entirely different story. But certainly, conservative Roman Catholics are not big fans of Pope Francis. Pope Francis has become famous in the eyes of many Roman Catholics, and not only Roman Catholics, many people who are not Roman Catholics look to Pope Francis as an example of how a religious leader should behave. Not too long ago, Pope Francis had some transgender people in the Vatican, and I watched a brief interview as they were riding on a bus into Vatican City, and they were saying these tremendous praises of Pope Francis, saying, wow, isn't this great? Isn't this great? Look at how far the Roman Catholic Church has progressed. Problem is, the Roman Catholic Church has not progressed. We simply have a progressive pope that can change tomorrow or next week or next year. There is nothing to guarantee that Pope Francis's progressiveness will rule in a decade or even a year. So we have no reason to believe that progressive Pope Francis has set a new course for the Roman Catholic Church. Interestingly, to me, despite the progressiveness of the Pope, those three major branches of Orthodoxy, Roman Catholicism, Eastern Orthodoxy, and Oriental Orthodoxy, have not merged. Why? Because in spite of Pope Francis being a progressive, he is not willing to give up his seat as the Pope. He is not willing to say, okay, I will simply be the Bishop of Rome. No, he's not willing to do that. I can't imagine any Pope doing that. Why? Because if someone had that idea, they wouldn't be elected Pope. If someone even hinted that they wanted to do away with the status of the Pope, how many people would vote for that person to become Pope? So what I would assume is that Pope Francis believes in the papacy. And that, I think, has been a continuing obstacle toward the union of those three branches of Christian orthodoxy. And it may remain so in the future as well. Now, there, of course, are the Protestants and other branches of Christianity as well. Originally, Protestantism emerged literally as a protest against certain abuses or indulgences in the Roman Catholic Church. Martin Luther, for example, was a strong critic of the papacy. But now, these days, the relationship between Lutherans and Roman Catholics is pretty good. The Episcopal Church, which was established in England and is called the Anglican Church in England, or the Church of England, arose because of a dispute over marriage in the UK. And now, when you go into a high Anglican or high Episcopal church, it is very much like an old style Roman Catholic Church service. So, in a sense, the Anglican communion is more Catholic than Catholicism itself is. So, could that happen again? It could, if a new pope was sworn in. If that pope believed in going back to the old days, then that pope could order that, or at least strongly recommend it, and many churches around the world would instantly become very similar to high church Anglican communion or high church Episcopalianism. So, in other words, I am not that positive. I am not that convinced that Pope Francis, by taking this negative view toward conservative people in his church, conservative clerics in his church, is really going to affect that much of a change. There are still conservative clerics. The Pope has limited power. The Pope can make recommendations, but the Pope cannot dictate. Now, the Pope can make certain statements that are allegedly infallible, but even with his infallible statements, many Pope statements have been rejected. In other words, his so-called ex cathedra statements have been rejected by many Roman Catholics. So again, I do not see this as necessarily showing a change in the tide of the relationship between those three major branches of Christian orthodoxy. That is not to say that there may not be a change in the future, but I don't think it will happen anytime soon. We will have to see, we will have to wait, but certainly Pope Francis, however progressive he may be, has not succeeded in bringing about a wholesale transformation in the Roman Catholic Church. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Meta-Realism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.